Thank you for coming, and thank Google for providing a forum that people like me can share our ideas. So first I want to do is tell you a little bit about the At My Pace series. This was the first book, in case you guys did not see it. And what caused me to start with At My Pace, with this whole idea, was at the time Sheryl Sandberg had her Lean In conversation, and everybody was running with Lean In, except for a fair chunk of my friends and people I knew who felt it didn't apply to them. And the question was, is there a story to be told about women who aren't on the Autobahn going full speed ahead? Is there a story to be told about those people who have a windy road with starts and stops, who are enjoying life in a different kind of way? And I could not find a book out there that laid credence to that. And so I decided that we would write that book. And I had as my model in the back of my mind the This I Believe series. Does anybody know This I Believe? It's really worth checking out sometime. So there are 500-word, very pithy pieces on different topics that the high school students oftentimes read. And you get a chance to see the world through many different people's eyes. But I knew that 500 words would not capture the topics that I was looking at. So I said, let's bump it up to 1,000 words. Let me do some guidelines, and let me help people. I wanted people who weren't famous and people who don't typically write. I wanted to get those voices out there. It's the voices of the people that most of us interact with every day. And the goal was to see the world through many different perspectives. At the end of the day, to expand the conversation. So that time it was about leaning in and the woman's journey, which I since have learned it shouldn't have been the woman's journey. It should have been the journey, because we all have the same challenges of how we're going to do it. And then at the end of it all, in some way in that process, we would discover something about ourselves and find some truths that would mean something to us. And why it's At My Pace is because even though we live in a fast-paced society, finding out these truths or working our way through these issues doesn't happen that quickly. It's some organic process, and my hope was that these books would help foster a conversation that would get us to that place that we can feel good about the topic. So that was the first book. I continue to give lots of discussions with groups on that. But the second book, so then what was happening was I was thinking, is there another book in me? And my mother was in her 91st year of life, and she wasn't doing that well. And so she lived in Denver, and I'd fly in and see her every 5 or 6 weeks. I would be there. I was always driving her crazy with, are you drinking enough? Are you eating enough? And how's the PT going? And just like your teenagers can sort of shut you down and sort of she was basically not wanting to engage in that conversation. So I decided I would change the conversation, and I wrote her a piece on one lesson I took from her life and its impact on me. And that lesson was about continuous lifelong learning. In her 80s, she was still taking classes. She had very young classmates in her class. One of the classes, they gave her a rolling backpack because they were afraid that she would fall as she tried to carry these books. And so it's my mother's rolling backpack that even in her 80s, she's taking classes. And I realized that for me, I wasn't always working on my own. I worked in different established companies, and I was always told how curious I was, and I think that curiosity and that wanting to learn came from her. So I wrote my piece, and then she loved it, and then I thought, well, this is going to be my next book. I'm going to go ask people to write a piece on their mother, only one lesson, not 10, story-based, and it cannot be mushy-gushy. That was just me, because I'm not a big mushy-gushy fan. So it turns out that mushy-gushy was really not that much in the cards anyway, because people have very complex feelings about their mothers, oftentimes. Not always, oftentimes. So I'm going to show you the cover of the book. This was the cover, as you have it there. And my question to you is, what do you think I was thinking when I had a fledgling with a flower and a mother bird looking down? What do you think was in my thoughts? Okay, I'm going to help you guys.
Judgment.
What was it?
Judgment.
Gratitude. Yeah, I wanted this fledgling had a flower, and to me it was a sign of giving back, saying thank you. Now it turns out that sometimes it's not a flower. Sometimes it's an olive branch. Sometimes it's putting your mother in context and being able to explain her to yourself and being able to validate that relationship. And I mentioned that I have guidelines when I go through this with contributors. In this guideline, I said you may not diss your mom. If it turns out that you cannot get to that place, that you can put her in context and appreciate her, then it's not the book for you. And some people couldn't. I had one woman who wrote me and she said, I've tried 3 times to write my piece. It is still a rant. So I thank you because I'm going to see a therapist now. And I had, we were just talking about dogs. I have a dog that I love dearly, and I went to take him to my groomer. I said, oh, by the way, I got this book. How would you like one of these books? And she's like, it's about moms. I'm like, yep. I have a really complicated relationship with my mom. I'm like, well, you don't have to take it. No, no worries. I was just, no, I'll take it. I've been a customer. She probably felt obliged. And then when I came back the next go around, she said to me, that was so meaningful because I have never been at peace with my mom. I read the book. I wrote a piece. She and I cried. It was a very healing moment. So I had a lot of things like that happen. So what I want to do today is 2 things. I want to talk about the flower and the olive branch, the people who were just, had sort of sheer appreciation, and the olive branch, the people who really had to struggle to put their mother in context, and give you guys a feeling. I've got my reading glasses so I can actually read a little bit, and give you guys a feeling for what I heard and what I took away from it all. So do we want to hear olive branches or flowers first? Okay, if you guys aren't voting, I'm going for flowers. All right, so there's a story here called Rough Patch. And Rough Patch, it's written by Laurel Lloyd, is a woman whose mother, when she was young, all she wanted to do was drama. Now her parents, one was a teacher, one was a nurse, and she lived in that stage of living where parents seemed to be able to actually dictate what their kids did. And so her parents said to her, you can do drama on the side, but you're not going to do that. You're going to be a teacher. That's a nice, solid career. You can support yourself. So she taught, but she didn't like it. And she ended up reverting back to drama, and that's what she did. And then one summer when she was doing drama, she met what would become her husband on the stage. At the end of the summer, they were engaged. And they then went ahead and had 4 kids. They left New York City and they headed to Vermont, and they raised their kids in a very small town in Vermont. He had a small hardware store. She was a mom who did PTA and Girl Scouts and sort of a traditional role. She didn't have too much time to act, almost no time, a little bit occasionally. He was still doing acting on the side. And then Laurel remembers that somewhere in the 20-year mark of their marriage, they hit this rough patch. And at 23 years in their marriage, they get divorced. When he was on stage in one of his shows, he met an actress. They fell in love, and that was the end of his marriage to his wife. So Laurel describes that moment when she says about her mother, she felt rejected and alone, but at age 50, she picked herself up and moved forward. In the years that followed, my mother acted in multiple theaters outside of our town. She got a degree in counseling, worked as a counselor in a local high school, and at a local shelter with teens. She became the caretaker of a refugee Guatemalan family, helping to raise 5 children while working at a Benedictine monastery. In time, her relationship with my dad healed, and they often chatted when seeing each other in town. Now, the weird thing is that Laurel's telling the story as an adult. She was married for 20 years, hit the same rough patch, and literally 23 years into her marriage, at age 50, she gets divorced. Actually, divorce goes through on the exact day of what would have been her parents' anniversary. And so she's feeling all over again, like remembering her mother and the pain. And she describes, with a young daughter, it was inevitable that I'd be seeing my ex and eventually his wife, because her ex also had a new woman who actually moved into the house that Laurel moved out of. So I braced myself and put my best foot forward. I went back to work and began to rebuild my life. 5 years since our split, my ex and I have moved beyond our difficult time. My goal during the hurt of the divorce was that we would find our way back to a positive place, and it has happened. I even had Thanksgiving dinner at my former home this past year with my ex, his wife, her ex, their son, my daughter, and some other guests. And then she concludes, she said, my friend stifled a gasp when I told her I'd be having Thanksgiving dinner with my ex and his wife. But isn't that how it should be? Letting go of the adversity in our lives, appreciating the good in what was, and moving on. In the end, it's the children who win. And that's the lesson that my mother taught me with the grace and kindness she showered on those in her life, a gift that I'll be sure to pass on to my daughter. So the same rough patch that her mother had was the same rough patch that she had, and she was able to take her mother's equanimity and strength and copy that when she had her moment. By the way, feel free to ask questions or interject a comment. It's supposed to be informal and interactive. Okay, I'll give you another story. That's what I call a flower story. This is a shorter one. So the story is that Elise Friedman, who's in her 70s, remembers being in Maui, traveling with her husband, super excited to get up early in the morning and go tour the island. And they're up very early and they're stuck in traffic because there is a big dump truck filled with pineapples that's blocking the road. She's just filled with pineapples. So she's sort of laughing at the peculiarity, up early to go see the island, and here you are in traffic because of a truck of pineapples. And she calls her mother, who lives in Buffalo. Now, first of all, she's on her cell phone. This is the 70s. And her mother first is like in shock. Oh, my gosh, you're calling me from Hawaii on her phone in Buffalo. So that was sort of cool. Then when they got through that, Elise says, but Mom, I'm calling you because we are stuck in traffic because there is a dump truck in front of us filled with pineapples. And so her mother says, well, Elise, have you tried the pineapples? To which Elise says, Mom, you know I don't eat pineapple. Elise describes herself as a person who always fished the pineapple out of any fruit cup before she would even start to have the fruit cup. And her mother says, Elise, be a grown-up, try the pineapple. So she actually decides to listen to her mother, and she tries the pineapple later that day, and she finds out that, lo and behold, the pineapple in Hawaii is way different than any pineapple she's ever tasted. And then she later that day goes to one of those gift stores so they can find that exact kind of pineapple that she can ship to her mother. Okay, so she does that. And she heads back home. And then 2 weeks later, she gets a call from her sister in Buffalo. And her sister says that their mother has just had a stroke. So Elise immediately goes to Buffalo to visit the mom. And at the end of the day, she goes to her apartment. And she opens up the fridge to go get some water. And there she sees the pineapple, uneaten, never to be eaten by her mother, who can't swallow anymore, right there, unwrapped. And she has a very big learning moment for herself right there, and I'm going to say it in her words. She writes, I have a tendency to be rather emphatic in my opinions, some of which I may have formed without a whole lot of reasonable evidence. Every so often, I am in the midst of holding forth, explaining why I would never, ever consider doing this or that. And then I hear my mother cautioning me. Elise, she is saying, be a grown-up. So for her, the pineapple was about opening up her mind and really taking the world fresh and not bringing her prejudices to that instant. So those are some flower stories. Anybody have a lesson they want to share about their mother, something that they took that was on the sweet side of life? Do we want some olive branch stories? Okay, well, we'll go for an olive branch story. So there's a story in this book called Emotional Blinders. And it's the story of a man named Martin Abramowitz who's in his 70s. His father was a cutter for the Triangle Shirt Factory. Who knows what does anybody know about the Triangle Shirt Factory? Okay, so we have, there was a factory that, it was a moment of tragedy, went up on fire, and many, many young girls were killed. I don't remember what the year was, but it was early 1900s. His father was a cutter for the factory. He remembers his father was not a well man. He was in and out of the hospital. Marty remembers visiting him, but not being able to go into the hospital because they didn't let kids into the hospital. He would have to be on the outside, sort of at the window, waving. And Marty has an older brother, 10 years older. So one day, his mother tells him that his father has gone to Florida to convalesce. And he sort of takes it at face value. He remembers that day. It turned out to be the day of his dad's funeral, but the mother has lied and told him that the father has moved to Florida to convalesce. He says, I remember what I'm sure was the day of that funeral. My brother walked me to school on that rainy March morning. I still see the expanding raindrop circles in the puddles on our block and feel the sadness as I put my boots and raincoat away in the walk-in closet at the back of my second grade classroom. And that's all he remembers. No funeral, no visitors at home, no weeping mother, no words of huge or hugs of consolation or processing of any kind. And he proceeds along this path that his dad is in Florida. And 2 years pass, no phone calls, no letters, no anything. And finally, he goes to his mother and he says, Daddy is dead, isn't he? And what he explains then is the impact of that lie. Because I had absorbed the lesson of my mother's decision, don't acknowledge death, don't notice pain, don't pay attention to any feelings, a low-level, won't-go-away sadness that you won't put into words works as a strategy to avoid pain and get through life. But that has an impact and a repercussion in his life because he describes as an older person, he was a failed partner, a failed parent. He couldn't find any real energy for life. He has a very active mind, but there was just a lethargy about how he did life because he had so learned to repress his feelings. And when I asked him if he wanted to write a piece, he wanted to write a piece because it was his chance to explain to himself and to his children and to his grandchildren why his mother did that. And he saw it in a whole different light, and he was able to put peace, find some peace for himself. So I'm going to read to you how he puts this in perspective. He says, I have come to understand Rosie's decision through a different lens, one that has a much more positive lesson. A widow at 42, with one acting out 17-year-old son, and the other a frail 7-year-old, and no income except Social Security. Rosie seems to have put on emotional blinders. She never bewailed her situation, never looked for a man. Instead, she set about making sure she could support her family by hand-sewing labels on men's neckties. My brother and I have that memory of trying to keep up with her as she would go full speed ahead, navigating the aisles of Macy's, not looking back to see if we were even keeping pace. So Rosie's decision to avoid pain was also about getting on with the business of life. She was smart enough to know that at some instinctive level what she needed to do was to keep her family and our lives intact. I have enormous respect for her ability to have done that and to have taught me a survival skill, even as I mourn her losses and mine. So I asked him why he wrote this. I mean, he's been living with us for many years. I think for him, he really wanted to codify that experience, what it meant to him at the time, what it means to him now, and how he can love and respect her decisions, even if for a very large chunk of his life it has some very detrimental effects on him.
It's hard not to be judgmental.
It's hard not to be judgmental. Very hard.
It seems really tough for a mother to not.
Yeah,
Kid.
right. And to see, I mean, and also that older brother who knew, right? Can you imagine being the brother, the 17-year-old brother, 10 years older, who knew this was happening, had to actually keep the lie as well. So there's probably a lot of ways to unpack that was damaging in a lot of ways. I had a woman, so I always try in these stories to reach out to groups that are not Newton Jewish. That's sort of my sweet spot, Newton Jewish, but I try to reach out to other parts of the universe. I was much more successful in the second book, in this book, than I was in the first book, and successful again in the third book. So I reached out to a woman who is from Guyana. And her parents, her mother was a little more on the social caste of society. Her mother was higher on the rung than her father. They lived in Guyana. Her father was a police officer who made his way up to, I think, a military officer of some kind. They had 4 daughters, and at some point their parents get divorced. And she is now living with her mother and her grandmother. And she misses her father terribly. And so the father decides every Saturday he's going to come visit the 4 daughters and he's going to have a good day with them. And this happens routinely. And so it's all very copacetic. And then one Saturday when he's visiting, a military truck comes by and says to her father, you have to go. And so he zooms away. It turns out Guyana was in the middle of a coup. And he was on the side of trying to repress the coup, and he had to go see if he could repress the coup. In the course of the coup, he died. He was killed. So now she has her mother, her grandmother, and then what happens is the mother remarries, and I don't know what the name of this man is because he was only referred to with a capital H as him, sort of like Lord Baltimore, he who shall not be named. It's him. And him is abusive, and I'm not sure if it's emotional or physical or both, but he's definitely abusive. And she is very angry at her mother because her mother never stands up for them. The grandmother is a big believer in, has a big belief in faith and God, goes to church every week, sings in the choir. And the grandmother says to this woman, you will find your salvation in the Lord. You are meant to serve the Lord. You will take your pain and all this, and that will be where you put it. And so she goes to church and she sings and she loves all that. And at a certain point, she decides she's going to the States because she has to get away from him, and she's angry at her mother. And she's able to come here, and she actually does become a reverend. Now, when I asked her if she would write a story about her mother, I didn't know all this. I just know that she kept on saying to me, how about my grandmother? Can I write about my grandmother? And I said, well, you can, but it's a book about mothers, but if grandmothers are what you want to honor, fine, we can do that. And then I don't hear from her. And as usually happens At My Pace, you put out you cast a big net and you get some yield, but some people drop out for different reasons, and I thought she was going to drop out. And then she calls me and she says, I'm coming over. And she walks into my door, right to my house. She's a reverend, and she says to me, the Lord has brought you to me. And I thought that I was like in a dreamland imagining this. And she says again, the Lord has brought you to me. And okay, what did I do? And what I did was make her revisit her past and make her find peace with her mother. And so I'm going to read you the end. She calls her peace. She actually called me recently and said, I have some 30-somethings. Can they write in your 20-something book? I'm like, nope, it's 20-somethings. But when I do 30-somethings, I'll come back to you. So here's what she writes at the end of Peace. She writes, it is over 4 decades later, and today I am a reverend. I have moved my mom to the States, and him has died. I have 2 children, and while I am not their friend, I am their ear. I support and guide them, and my second husband is also committed to them. I thank the Lord daily, and I have forgiven my mom for not supporting my sisters and me after my dad died. It has taken a while, but I have found my peace, and hopefully she has found hers. So that is a pure olive branch story. That is somebody who had a lot of consternation, a lot of anger, and was able to, in the course of writing a piece, find her peace. So I think what's interesting to me is I speak about this book to groups, synagogues, community places, you name it, but I haven't had a chance to take it into the work setting, even though I've wanted to. And I think that the lessons from others applies as much to work as it does into any community setting you could. Because we take our lessons from our mom with us. For good or for bad, they are us, and that's what we bring to work. And I had this lunch a while back where I was telling one of my clients about the book, and he pulls out his cell phone. Now, he works in a technology company. He has about 300 people in his organization that he manages. And he shows me that whenever he feels overwhelmed or just sort of daunted by the challenges, he looks at this note that his mother hand wrote for him years ago. So his mother was an immigrant from Ireland. She came over when she was 16. She knew nobody. There was an Irish community here in Boston. That was helpful. She became a clerk at Jordan Marsh, and she worked all her way up to an executive buyer. And she wrote for her 2 kids this thing called the Ladder of Success. And he showed me, I think, I will, I can, I did, and it has percentages by it. And so he looks at that handwritten note when he feels like the world's just a little bigger than he wants it to be, or a little harder. And when I asked him what that was about, he tells me 2 stories. The first story is that they went to church every Sunday. And when they went to church, there would be a series of people from a halfway house in the back of the church. And the first thing she would do, excuse me, is she would go up and shake everybody's hand that's part of the halfway house. Evidently, that was unusual because most people didn't do that. And she offered people afterwards rides home. And he said he took from that the way she was able to extend dignity and respect to everybody, no matter your lot in life, and that was something he wanted to make sure he copied. The second memory he had was on July 4th, before they could go do the big parade and celebrate. She said, you have to clean up. And it wasn't cleaning up inside the house, it was cleaning up outside. And it wasn't just cleaning up the lawn and the sidewalk, it was going down the block and seeing if there was any garbage, any refuse to pick up. Because she wanted him to understand that accountability was more than just about your area here. It was about really extending a much bigger arm and being able to take responsibility for a bigger piece of the world than just your lot. So he looks at this ladder of success, and he thinks about how he treats people, and he thinks about how he builds accountability within his teams. And that's his lesson from his mother that he takes into work. So now I'm going to ask you guys, is there a lesson that anybody in this room can imagine that you take into work, something that your mother has given you that you can see a connection to in how you behave at work?
My mother used to always say what her mother said to her, which is if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important to sometimes to be positive, not be overly critical, and certainly think about it before you're negative about stuff.
Right. No, that's a good one. Just being positive goes a long way. Well, there's a lot of lessons. There's a really funny story in this book by Danny Brazil. It's called Always Talking. He describes his mother. Actually, it's so funny, I'm going to read you a part of it. And she's married to a quiet librarian. He is very happy to give his wife the run of the house. So he starts it off, Mom loves to talk. It can drive a person nuts. My mother has never received a piece of mail that she did not feel compelled to read aloud to anyone in the room. So Danny, you remember Mrs. Heffelnagel, she'll say, she died 4 years before you were born? Well, I just received a letter from her daughter. Let me read it to you. And then she'll read about a letter of someone I do not know, about things I do not care about. And like Walt Disney, no matter what travail she describes, she always manages to find a silver lining to create a happy ending. And then he describes being in the car with her. She's always talking. I don't ever remember sitting in the car with my mother throughout my childhood where she did not play some sort of game with us kids. Hey, Danny, there's a Volkswagen bug, she'd point out while smacking me in the arm. Hey, Danny, look at the license plates on the car. How many different states can you spot? Hey, Danny, what sounds does your name start with? I'd make a D sound, and she would challenge me to find sounds that started with that sound. Dairy Queen, I'd shout. Dunkin' Donuts. Yes, I was an obese child. My poor father could never get a word in, nor anyone for that matter, when my mother began speaking. So, honey, tell Danny who was on the plane with us. And as my father began to open his mouth, mother would blurt out, the San Francisco Giants. And honey, tell Danny what they says to you. And Dad would make another fruitless attempt to speak. Mom would share the rest of the story. So he says at the end, now Mom always has something to say, and I am now a motivational speaker who gets paid to talk. Who do you think I took after? Yeah. Anyway, I think it's really interesting and maybe helpful to think about the lessons. It could also be lessons your father has given you, but this book is for my mom, dedicated to my mom, so that was why I chose mothers. But I think who we are at home is mostly who we are at work, and the lessons from our parents are very much a factor in who that person is. Now, I'm happy to take any questions. I could give you more stories, but you got the book, so you could read it yourself. But if you have any questions or thoughts, I'm happy to take them.
I'll offer another story, a lesson from my father, just because you mentioned fathers. I remember being a little kid and complaining about having to go to school. Mm-hmm. And I've got a 17-year-old daughter now who gives me the same thing about complaining about going to school. But when I was a kid and I was just so upset I didn't want to go to school, it was a waste of my time, I didn't like school. And my dad said to me, I go to work every day. I don't want to go to work every day. You just do it.
Right, right.
And that kind of stayed with me.
Right.
Sometimes there's things you got to do.
Right. It's not always what you want to do, it's not what you got to do. Yeah, no, that's true. Well, sometimes when we get into these rooms especially if it's not when I've gotten into rooms with a lot of, the sweet spot for me in this book is middle-aged women who are contemplative and trying to sort of think back about their moms and about their life. And it's just so interesting to see how their decisions were driven by a memory of their mother and what they take with it. So, and my daughter, I was saying earlier, some people were here, my daughter wanted to write a piece, and I was like, no, you don't need to write a piece. It's not about me, it's about the world out there. No, I want to write a piece. And she writes actually a really good piece, even though I didn't want her to. And her lesson, I always said to her, Naomi, responsibility goes up and credit goes down. And she works at Boston Scientific, and she always tells me that those are words that have always stuck with her: responsibility up, credit down. Because you're oftentimes in teams which don't give enough credit to the people who are doing the work, and it's very easy for someone who is further up in the chain to take the credit. Not that it happens here, but I'm saying, that would be an inclination that you could just be aware of. So I was happy to hear that some words that I had said as a mom actually made it into a piece. But it's good. So I think if you guys are thinking about a creative present for your mother, you could give her a copy of the book, or your copy of the book, and you could write her a little note, as people have done. I had one woman who said to me, I would not have been able to write a piece for this book because I would have been all about dissing my mom. So I said, okay, tell me about your mom. Well, she's 94, and what does she do? Well, she plays lots of games, canast. She listed a whole bunch of games that she plays. And I said to her, and tell me, I happen to know a little bit about this woman, not a lot. I said, tell me what you like to do. She said, well, I play games too. And she actually teaches games. That's one of her hobbies, that she gets paid to teach games. So I said to her, and you can't find any gift there about your mother in her 90s, and then you being a games player as well? And then she saw me like a couple weeks later, and she said to me, thank you, because I'm actually gonna thank my mom for that. And she didn't think she had any thanks in her, but she actually did. So that has come up in so many different ways where people have had a chance to thank their mother. So it's late February, last day of February, Mother's Day is in May, and you have a couple months. You could write your mother a little note and give her the book, and she probably would think it's about one of the nicest presents she could have. Thank you guys for coming. I know you guys are busy. I'm happy to take questions, but if you don't have questions, then I'll let you guys get back to work.
I guess I have one question.
Yes.
Did you notice the difference between mothers and sons versus mothers and daughters in the pieces?
Not so much, actually. I really did not. The men who stepped up and wanted to write were, for the most part, men who were very comfortable sharing their emotions and didn't have a... So I would say that I didn't see so much of that. I actually originally thought this would be a book about mothers and daughters. And my son, who is my copy editor, said, well, sons are going to want to write about their mothers too. And it was like a new idea to me that sons would actually speak about their mothers. And so then I went running around. I'm like, well, I can't just have two men in the book or one man in the book. So then I went around and started asking men, do you want to write about your mother? And the biggest constraint was just either time or people very uncomfortable with their writing skills. That's a big theme I have in these books, is people will say, well, I have ideas, but I'm not a writer. And I always say, you don't have to be a writer. I will help you. You have to have thoughts, but we can take your thoughts and we can make a piece. And they're so happy afterwards because they wouldn't have done it on their own. But I think I see a difference in age more than I see a difference in gender. The older you get, the more appreciative. Some of the younger stories are angsty, so.
I think that last comment about the age thing seems to me, as you get older, you experience more of life and you bump into these things. A lot of the lessons that I feel like I'm starting to learn, or as I understand myself and go inside myself and learn more about my own character and personality and the way I handle situations, gives me an appreciation for the way my mum handled herself. Went through a divorce. My father's business went bankrupt before that, and then she went through a divorce. But the way she handled herself, and the one thing that struck me through this whole thing was the way that she sings all day long around the house, doing anything. And that sense, I carry that same musical sense with me. So I just catch myself sometimes doing the dishes while the kids are getting ready to go to school, and it's just doing the same kind of thing. Any song, it could be one of the kids' tunes, it could be ABBA, which my mum used to love, or whatever it is, and I'll do this, and I'm like, I'm crazy, but then I turn around and I see the kids doing the same thing, walking around the house, singing to themselves about while they're doing tasks, and it's just a cascading, I don't know, it's genetic or just crazy.
But that's a lovely thing to pass through generations.
But to be able to, and I think the age part that the tie in there was that just being able to recognize that. You get to a certain age where you start to see all these different pieces of your mother, and The things that you hated at one time,
Right.
you're either experiencing it with your own daughters or sons, or you just learn more about yourself and how you handle situations.
Right, that's true. That's definitely true. Lacey?
Yeah, I'll just second that. That it occurred to me that I was born when my mother was almost 30, so I haven't gotten to the point yet where I am really doing any of the things that I saw her doing. And I've been married almost 4 months now, and I'm just starting to see things where I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm doing this just like my mom, or all these things she used to remind me about. I'm like, oh, this is where it's useful.
Yeah.
Right? That I'm just starting to be in the kind of situations that I saw her in.
Right. We love that as parents. We love when we see that our kids don't think that what we did was just crazy, but there actually was some reason behind it all. Well, keep your eyes open for ways you're like your parents, and then if they're at all flattering, you can let them know, because it's always good as a parent to have a moment of recognition. Well, thank you all for coming today. I appreciate that. Take care.